Hey there, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments.
I walked down the aisle thinking, if anyone's attention missed the ultrasound photo taped inside my invite, they'd sure notice it now. The air smelled like flowers and old wood, the kind of blend that makes a memory sink deep into your bones. And as I gripped my bouquet tighter, my thoughts weren't on Jack, waiting at the altar, or on the life we were about to build together, but on Mia, my sister, my best friend turned reluctant guest star in my own wedding story. Except Mia wasn't just attending. She had, without asking, decided to make herself part of the headline. 3 weeks before the big day, I started getting weird calls from people I hadn't spoken to in months. An old college roommate who moved to Oregon, one of Jack's cousins I barely knew, and even my childhood piano teacher. Each conversation started the same way with a hesitant, "So, congratulations, to both of you?" Followed by an awkward pause I couldn't make sense of until my Aunt Valerie forwarded me a photo from her invitation. I sat in my car, half late for a final venue meeting, and stared down at my phone like it had just slapped me across the face. There, neatly tucked into the folds of the creamy wedding invite that I had agonized over with the printer for days, was a black and white ultrasound image. Next to it, scribbled in silver pen with far too much enthusiasm, were the words, "Hope you don't mind sharing the attention. Love, Mia plus baby." It wasn't just a note. It was a bomb, casually dropped into the most personal moment of my adult life, and she had done it smiling. I scrolled through my texts with her, confused, searching for some hint or warning, nothing. Just a thumbs-up emoji she sent when I told her the invites had gone out. I didn't call her, I didn't scream or cry or demand an explanation. Instead, I sat there in the car until the sun dipped below the edge of the parking lot, and I went inside that venue like nothing had happened. My event planner complimented my composure. I said thank you and nodded and wondered whether I was slowly, quietly losing my mind. But if I wasn't going to let her know it. Mia and I had always been close. People used to mistake us for twins when we were younger, and even now, we looked more like sisters in a Hallmark movie than real life. She was just a year younger than me, and growing up we shared everything from clothes to crushes to late-night arguments over who'd get the bathroom first. But somewhere along the way, maybe in college, maybe after I got engaged, our connection started to fray. She dated men she never brought home. She was vague about her job, her life. I tried to pull her in, invite her to lunches, birthdays, Sunday dinners, but she was always busy or tired or just not in the mood. So when she called to say she was pregnant, I didn't expect the excitement in her voice to feel competitive. "It's kind of perfect timing, right?" she had said back in January. "You'll be the bride and I'll be the radiant mom-to-be, like double the joy." I laughed then, a nervous, confused laugh. I thought she was joking. Apparently she wasn't. The day after I saw the ultrasound photo, I told Jack. He raised his eyebrows and just muttered, "She actually did that?" and then shook his head. He didn't offer much else, just a quiet squeeze of my hand. He was good like that, steady, calm, but I could tell he was waiting to see if I'd explode or ignore it. I chose to smile, and that scared even me a little. My mom was furious when she found out, but too polite to say anything publicly. She offered to call Mia and ask her to stop. I told her no. I didn't want to play that game. I wanted Mia to think she had gotten away with it. I wanted her to feel like I was above caring, that I was too mature, too poised, too happy to let something like that get under my skin. Because if I let myself go there, if I let the anger bloom into words, I wasn't sure I could keep it from burning everything else down too. But inside I was hurt, deeply. I kept replaying the decision-making in my head, how she must have taken the time to print dozens of those photos, slipping each one into the envelopes I had addressed by hand, with our family tree in mind. She must have laughed to herself, thinking she was being cute or bold or whatever people like her call sabotage these days. She didn't even tell me until after I confronted her. And even then, her response was a casual, "Oh, come on, it's family. People love a baby story." I smiled then too. I even hugged her, but something in me shifted, something colder. The following week, when she tried to suggest changes to the reception playlist, saying maybe we should include some baby-friendly songs, I told her I'd already finalized the list. When she offered to do a fun surprise announcement during the toast, I smiled and said I was sure there'd be plenty of surprises already. She laughed, not quite catching the edge in my voice. By the time rehearsal night rolled around, everyone was walking on eggshells, except Mia. She floated in like a pageant queen, radiant in a maternity-wrapped dress that seemed picked out to match my color scheme, but just slightly outshine it. She walked up to me at the end of the night when people were filtering out into the parking lot and leaned in close enough that I could smell her perfume, something soft and citrusy, and whispered, "Ready to share the spotlight tomorrow, sis?" I turned to look at her and didn't say a word, because by then, I had already slipped the priest the note. If you had walked into my house that week before the wedding, you would have seen a woman surrounded by everything that was supposed to represent joy. White roses in tall buckets that line the kitchen counters, menu cards half stuffed in linen napkins across the dining room table, champagne flutes waiting to be boxed and sent to the venue. But none of that beauty made its way into my bloodstream. I walked through it all like a ghost trapped in her own celebration, waiting for the next ambush. And it came faster than I expected, in ways more petty and more personal than I'd even prepared for. Which is saying something considering I'd already been blindsided by a sonogram making the rounds like it was a party favor. I tried to keep things moving forward, telling myself that no one ruins a wedding alone, not even a sister with a flair for drama and a hunger for the kind of attention she hadn't earned. But weddings, I quickly learned, aren't just ceremonies or even celebrations. They are stress-fueled, high-stakes, emotional marathons where the people closest to you, the ones you assume will lift you up, are just as capable of knocking you down when the mood or motive strikes. And Mia? She wasn't just knocking. She was stomping with purpose. It started with the seating chart. Now I had labored over that thing like it was a crossword puzzle written in ancient Greek, trying to avoid awkward X's, political opposites, and people who hadn't spoken since our grandmother's funeral 5 years ago. So when I walked into the venue for our final walkthrough and saw that several table markers had been rearranged, I didn't panic immediately. I assumed it was a mix-up. But when I noticed that Mia's fiancé, Travis, a man I barely knew and who had the social charm of wet cardboard, had been moved to sit beside Jack's college friend who, according to Jack, had a habit of accidentally insulting pregnant women, something in my gut said, "Look closer." So I did. I took a step back and examined the full layout. Mia's table had been moved closer to the dance floor. Mine, oddly, was slightly shifted, just enough to throw off the planned decor. I asked the planner, who looked at me apologetically and said, "Your sister dropped by yesterday to help. She said you'd asked her to finalize things." I hadn't, obviously, but instead of losing it, instead of tearing into Mia with the kind of wrath she clearly deserved, I nodded, thanked the planner, and smiled so wide I thought my jaw might crack. Because that's what you do when someone is trying to sabotage your day in slow, deliberate inches. You don't yell, you don't throw a scene, you absorb the ridiculousness of it all and store it away like bullets in a chamber, saving them for the right moment, the perfect shot. Later that evening, I got a text from Mia, just 3 words, "Love the changes," followed by a winking face. I stared at that message like it was a confession letter, not because of what it said, but because of what it proved. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she wanted me to know it too. She wanted me to stew in it, to either erupt or roll over, and I wasn't about to give her either. Instead, I called Jack and told him to meet me at the bakery. When we got there, I asked the baker if we could change the cake topper. Originally, it was supposed to be a classic bride and groom, arms entwined, elegant and simple, but I requested something different, something a little less subtle. The baker raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. She just took down my notes and said she'd make it work. Jack didn't ask either. He knew better by then. He just took my hand and said, "You okay?" And I said, "Not yet, but I will be." The next morning, I went to the florist to pick up the last-minute bouquets and found out Mia had already called to request a few adjustments to the centerpieces. claiming she had my approval. Her tweaks? She'd added small plastic rattles into half of them, baby blue and soft yellow ones nestled between white roses and baby's breath. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had them removed. I said nothing. That night, we had the rehearsal dinner. It was supposed to be low-key, a backyard setup at my parents' house with string lights, catered sliders, and plenty of wine. But when I walked in, I noticed something off right away. People were crowding around something at the back deck, murmuring with the kind of interest normally reserved for gender reveals or celebrity sightings. When I got closer, I saw it, a photo board of Mia, pregnant, laughing, holding her belly, kissing Travis, holding up tiny onesies, a whole damn shrine to her unborn baby at my rehearsal dinner. She had brought it in the back of her car and told my mom it would add some warmth to the party. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I walked over to the board, smiled politely, and moved it to the guest room. I said it might get damaged outside with the humidity. Mia watched me do it and didn't protest. She just narrowed her eyes like she was waiting to see what I'd do next. And what I did was nothing, at least nothing she could see. Because later that night, when everyone had gone home and the lights had been wound back up the porch railings, I went into the guest room and pulled out the letter I'd written 2 nights before. It wasn't long, it wasn't poetic, but it was honest. And it was meant for one person. I folded it, slipped it into a cream envelope, and wrote the priest's name across the front. Then I walked it down to my car, drove the 20 minutes to the church, and slid it into the folder where our vows were supposed to go. The church was empty, quiet except for the sound of old wood settling and the faint hum of the city outside. I stood there a moment, alone in the pews, and felt something shift in me again. Less cold this time, more calm. When I got home, Mia had texted again. This time she wrote, "Big day tomorrow, hope you're ready to shine." I stared at it for a long time, then typed back, "I'm ready, are you?" She didn't reply, and for the first time in 2 weeks, I slept through the night. If the rehearsal dinner was supposed to be the calm before the storm, then nobody gave the weather report to Mia, who walked in late, kissed every guest like she was the one getting married, and floated around the backyard like a movie star who had somehow wandered into someone else's family gathering but decided to bless the moment with her glittering presence anyway. My dad, bless him, tried to give a toast after dessert, something simple and heartfelt about love, resilience, and how proud he was of both his daughters. But halfway through, Mia made a loud joke about baby names and how if her kid turned out to be a boy, they might name him after the groom. Since Jack is technically part of the family now anyway. And suddenly the entire table was laughing. Not at her, not really, but enough to shift the spotlight off the person who should have been at the center of the evening and onto the one who made a career out of hijacking it. I watched Jack smile politely, his fingers tight around the stem of his wine glass, and for the first time I saw the flicker of real discomfort in his expression. Not quite annoyance, not yet, but a kind of secondhand embarrassment that crept in like a draft beneath the door of our carefully curated celebration. He wasn't used to this side of Mia, not fully. He'd seen glimpses, of course, witnessed a few subtle digs, caught her smirks when I corrected something she said. But tonight, with so many eyes on her and none of them blinking, she was performing at full volume, and he was beginning to understand that this wasn't about sibling banter or family dynamics. It was about Mia refusing to be a guest in a world she didn't control. After dinner, while guests lingered by the fire pit and picked through a platter of pastries, I slipped inside to help my mom with the dishes. She stood at the sink, humming softly, the lines around her eyes deepening each time she glanced through the window and caught sight of Mia holding court on the lawn. She didn't say anything at first, just passed me a stack of wet plates to dry, her mouth a thin line of practiced patience. Then finally she spoke, not about the wedding or Mia or the ultrasound invitations, but about the way people change when the lights get bright enough. "Some people mistake attention for love," she said, not looking at me. "And when they do, they'll do almost anything to stay in the light, even if it means standing on someone else's stage." I didn't respond. I just dried the plates one by one and wondered if my mother knew that the note I had slipped the priest wasn't just a clever jab or some half-hearted attempt at getting even. It was the only way I knew how to make it stop, to shift the weight back onto the right shoulders, if only for one moment, one truth-soaked breath in a weekend that had been nothing but Mia's show. Later, when I stepped back outside, I saw that Mia had somehow taken over the playlist too. She had queued up a set of songs that, on the surface, seemed harmless, pop ballads, old hits, but woven between them were tracks clearly chosen to underline her own story, lullabies disguised as indie hits, love songs that mentioned motherhood or miracles, and even, God help me, a country tune about babies being blessings. She had turned my rehearsal dinner into a baby shower with catered sliders, and the only thing I could do was smile and take it. Except I didn't, not fully, because when she stood up to make her impromptu toast, clinking her water glass with the back of a spoon and flashing that familiar faux humble grin, I made a small, quiet choice that changed everything. I reached out and gently squeezed Jack's hand under the table. He turned to me, and I leaned in, just enough for only him to hear, and said, "She has no idea what's coming tomorrow." He blinked, surprised, not at my words but at the steadiness in my voice. And when he nodded, almost imperceptibly, I knew we were aligned. Mia cleared her throat and began her speech, something rambling and performative about how love comes in many forms, how marriage is about building families, and how the future isn't just about two people, it's about the generations that come after. A few people clapped, a few raised eyebrows. My grandmother, God bless her, whispered to my aunt, loud enough for half the table to hear, "Does she think she's the one getting married?" I laughed, out loud. It felt good, strange, but good. Mia sat down beside me, smug, and said, "I hope you don't mind. I thought it'd be nice to remind everyone what really matters." I looked at her for a long moment. "I don't mind," I said evenly. "I'm just glad you said it out loud." She furrowed her brow, confused, but I turned away before she could ask what I meant. After the last guest left and my parents went upstairs, Jack and I stayed behind to clean up. He didn't ask about the priest or the note or my sudden calm. He just wrapped his arms around me while we stood on the porch and said, "You're handling this better than I ever could." But I wasn't handling it. I was orchestrating it. Mia thought she had written the first and last act of this wedding drama, but what she didn't know was that I had the ending, tucked inside a folded envelope, waiting in the hands of a man who would, in less than 24 hours, read it in front of everyone we both knew. And it wouldn't be petty or cruel or loud. It would be true. And when truth lands like a hammer in a room full of glass, the only thing left to do is wait for the shatter. From the moment I opened my eyes that morning, I knew the air was holding something different. Not just the kind of thick, nervous buzz that tends to cling to big days like morning dew, but something more charged, something heavier, like the sky itself was bracing for a jolt. Like everyone who walked into that church was going to be struck by something they didn't see coming. I moved through the morning like I was following choreography I had memorized in a previous life. Makeup chair, coffee in one hand, bouquet in the other, bridesmaids fluttering around me like well-meaning butterflies. All of them buzzing with excitement, none of them aware that my heart wasn't pounding from nerves, or even from joy, but from the anticipation of a moment I had planned in secret and held in silence for days, clutching the edges of that plan like a match I was about to strike in a room soaked in gasoline. The ceremony was set in a small chapel Jack and I had chosen together, after visiting nearly a dozen. A place with old wooden pews that creaked with history, stained glass that filtered light so perfectly it made you believe in something bigger, and a center aisle just wide enough for a dramatic entrance if someone ever needed to make one, which, as it turned out, someone did. The flowers had been placed exactly as I had envisioned, cascading arrangements of whites and greens stretching across the altar in a way that made it feel like you were stepping into a painting, not a building. And when I arrived, the hush that fell over the room was everything I had dreamed of and nothing like what I had prepared for. I took a long breath as I stood behind the heavy doors, my hand curled around my father's arm, my veil already blurring the edges of what I could see. And I listened, not for the music or the cue, but for her. I knew Mia would do something. I didn't know what form it would take, but I felt it in my bones. She'd dressed in a floor-length dress just shy of bridal white. And even though she was 7 months pregnant and glowing with the kind of radiance no makeup artist could replicate, I knew she had chosen that look not because it flattered her figure, but because it flirted with the edge of what was appropriate, because it made people glance twice, maybe even whisper. As I stepped into the aisle and the music swelled, I saw her seated on the groom's side, of course, even though she should have been with our family, her belly prominently displayed, hands folded in exaggerated elegance across it, a satisfied smile tugging at her lips as though she were watching a show she'd directed herself. People turned, of course they did. The ultrasound photo she had placed at the welcome table had already done its job, drawing a mix of confused and delighted glances, and I could tell from the murmurs that her moment had landed exactly as she'd hoped. And I gave her that moment. I let it breathe. I let her believe she had won. The ceremony began like any other. The priest welcomed our guests, offered a few kind words about love and faith, and then turned to us, eyes warm and steady, and said, "Now Olivia and Jack have chosen to share personal vows today, and I've been honored to read them aloud on their behalf." He opened the folder, the one I had quietly handed him 2 nights ago, and pulled out the single sheet I had tucked inside. There was a pause, just a moment, but I could feel the tension crawl across the room like static electricity. Jack didn't look at me. He didn't need to. He knew. The priest began to read, and with each word, the silence thickened. "Mia, you once told me that the future isn't just about 2 people, that weddings are about families, about the stories we build beyond ourselves. You were right about that. You were so right, in fact, that I wanted to make sure this moment honored not just the love Jack and I share, but the truth that sometimes gets lost when people fight to be seen." You could hear the shift, a collective inhale, the kind people make when they sense the air changing. The priest continued. "So today, I want to say thank you. Thank you for reminding me that attention is fleeting, but honesty lasts. Thank you for helping me realize that the loudest voices are often the most unsure. And thank you for showing me, in the most unexpected ways, exactly how strong love has to be to survive the distractions." There was a beat. Then another. You could feel the question ripple across the chapel. Who was she talking to? What is this? The priest looked up, uncertain, but I gave him the smallest nod. He finished the note. "And finally, to my family, to our friends, and to the child whose face we've all now seen before we've seen the bride walk down the aisle, welcome. Welcome to our story, but remember, not every story needs a co-author." There was no applause, no reaction at first, just stunned silence. Then, one laugh, quiet, short, sharp. I don't know who it was, maybe my grandmother again. Maybe someone else who had spent the last few weeks watching the train approach and finally saw it crash. All heads turned. Toward her, Mia. She was still for once, frozen in her perfect pose, but her eyes had narrowed into slits. Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. She looked at me, then Jack, then the priest, and I saw the color drain from her cheeks. She stood up, slowly, then turned, without a word, and walked out the back doors of the chapel. The creak of the hinges might as well have been a thunderclap. Jack reached for my hand, and I took it. The priest looked at me, unsure whether to continue, and I gave him the signal. The rest of the ceremony went on, quiet, beautiful, but changed. When we kissed, it felt less like a celebration and more like a punctuation mark, an end to something that had taken years to unravel, and a beginning I hoped would never feel quite so crowded again. But the real aftermath, the real unraveling that came later, because as it turned out, Mia hadn't left quietly, and she wasn't done, not even close. After the last of the champagne had gone flat, and the sparklers had fizzled out into smoke curling across the garden's damp stone paths, after the guests had danced themselves sore, and the playlist had looped one too many times through the same sentimental ballads. After the cake had been cut and the leftover slices boxed and refrigerated, in a clumsy stack of pastel boxes. What remained of the wedding was nothing more than a trail of high heels abandoned beneath chairs, wilted flowers scattered like forgotten promises, and a lingering sense that something sacred had been both preserved and irrevocably altered in the span of a single day. Most brides end their wedding nights tired, euphoric, cocooned in the soft fuzz of new beginnings. But I ended mine sitting barefoot on the edge of a rented hotel suite bathtub, pulling pins from my hair one by one, staring at my reflection and wondering if Mia would ever speak to me again. The morning after the ceremony, before Jack and I even had a chance to crawl fully into the cocoon of our brief honeymoon weekend, I got the first text. Not from her, of course, but from someone on the periphery of her orbit, a cousin who had once driven across 3 states to bail her out of a bad breakup. The kind of loyal soldier Mia always managed to collect. The message was simple, almost too polite, as if trying to disguise a grenade beneath a tea towel. Hey, just so you know, Mia left the reception crying. She didn't want to make a scene, but wow. And with that single line, the storm I had known would come, the one that had been building beneath every smug smile and sugar-sweet comment for weeks, finally cracked open, because of course she had cried. Of course she had stormed out in silence that wasn't really silence, designed to be noticed, dissected, replayed. She had always been good at that, at walking away just loud enough for the door to echo behind her, loud enough for the story to travel faster than the truth. I waited 3 days before I texted her. I didn't ask if she was okay. I didn't apologize. I simply wrote, "We need to talk when you're ready." And then I put the phone down, folded towels, packed the last of our things, and joined Jack on the porch, where he sat drinking coffee and trying, bless him, to pretend this wasn't going to follow us into every family gathering from now until we were old and gray. When she finally responded, it was exactly what I expected. Measured, clipped, dripping with the kind of hurt that doesn't ask for healing, only acknowledgement. "You humiliated me. That wasn't fair. You could have just told me to back off." I stared at the message for a long time, not because I didn't know how to respond, but because part of me, maybe the part that used to braid her hair when we were kids, or cover for her when she snuck out, wanted to believe she meant it, that beneath the deflection was a kernel of understanding. But I knew better, I replied. "I asked you in 1,000 ways. I gave you space. I didn't react to the invites, the flowers, the speech. You didn't just want to share the day, you wanted to rewrite it." She didn't text back. Days passed, then weeks. Eventually, our parents got involved, as parents do. My mom called with concern thick in her voice, asking if I would be the one to extend the olive branch, since Mia's just hormonal and it's been hard on her, being alone in this part of her life. I nodded, said I'd think about it, and hung up knowing that wasn't what this was about. Not really. Mia hadn't needed my wedding to be her support group. She had needed it to be a mirror, one that reflected back what she was afraid she'd lost. Relevance, charm, a version of herself that existed before her life split in a direction she hadn't expected. Weeks later, I saw her again, at a baby shower thrown by one of her friends, where I'd been invited out of courtesy or guilt. It didn't matter which. She was glowing again, surrounded by tissue paper and pastel balloons, sitting in a chair made up like a throne. When I arrived, she gave me a nod, nothing more, and went on opening gifts with a kind of deliberate cheerfulness that felt both genuine and rehearsed. At one point, I caught her eye across the room, and we held the stare for a long beat. No smiles, no waves. Just a look between two people who had once shared a bedroom and now shared something far messier. A fracture built, not from a single fight, but from years of small, silent wars never acknowledged, never resolved. I walked outside for air, and after a while, I felt her presence behind me. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside me, her hand resting gently on the curve of her belly. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," she said quietly, as though afraid the truth might unravel something she wasn't ready to lose. I nodded. You always go that far, Mia. That's the problem. She looked down, then back up. You didn't have to go nuclear. You could have just told me to stop. I turned to face her. I did. You just weren't listening. There was no hug, no tearful apology, just silence, and a breeze that carried with it the smell of cut grass and the faint sound of someone laughing inside. She said, "You're really married now." I smiled, but there was sadness in it. "Yeah, and you're really going to be a mom." We stood there for another moment before she walked away, back into the house, back into a version of her life that didn't have room for soft endings or neat resolutions. I watched her go, and I knew that something had shifted. Not broken, not fixed, just shifted. A slow tectonic drift between two people who used to be each other's first call and were now just echoes in the same story told from different rooms. Sometimes love doesn't die. It just changes shape, hardens in the places it used to bend, and waits to see whether the next generation will make different choices with the softness they inherit. And as I stood there, alone, a new kind of quiet settling around me, I realized something. Maybe revenge isn't always a loud, triumphant moment. Sometimes it's just saying exactly what needs to be said at exactly the right time, and then letting silence speak the rest.